Hello, I'm Laura Davis, co-author of The Courage to Heal and founder of The Writer's Journey. And I wanted to give you some encouragement for where you may be in your healing process. 35 years ago, when I first remembered that I had been sexually abused, I was in such a state of devastation. I was certain I would never make love again. I was certain I was unlovable. I was sure I would never be a parent, which is something I had wanted to be. And I felt just completely broken and disconnected. And I felt like this little piece of dust floating around in the universe. And I guess what I want to tell you is that healing is worth it, and it's possible. And it's not just possible for other people, the other survivors. It is actually possible for you. And for you, you're not the exception. And that if you take the steps of the healing process, if you go on this journey, you will not be in the kind of pain you are in right now. And that you have a full, embodied, joyful possibility at life. And all you have to do is take these steps, and millions of survivors have done it before you. I have done it. And my life has joy and family and connection and meaning, things I never could have fathomed or imagined 35 years ago. And I just want you to know that you can definitely get here too.
Welcome to Women Emerging, Reclaiming Our Souls from Sexual Abuse. I'm your host, Misa Hopkins. Laura Davis is the author of 7 best-selling nonfiction books, including The Courage to Heal, a guide for women survivors of sexual abuse, The Courage to Heal workbook, I Thought We'd Never Speak Again, and her forthcoming memoir, Wholehearted. Laura teaches writing workshops in Santa Cruz, California, and leads transformative writing retreats in Tuscany, Peru, Bali, Spain, oh my God, incredible places, and other international locations. As the creator of the Writer's Journey Roadmap, which I can tell you is absolutely wonderful, Laura sends out free evocative writing prompts by email each Tuesday, and you can learn more about that at lauradavis.net. So Laura, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here too.
Great. And we get to talk about writing.
Yes, we do.
Yay. And I love writing so much. So tell me, have you always been a writer?
Yeah, I've always been a writer. And I think I've had 2 streams in my writing. One is I've written personally because I've used writing as a tool to discover what I was thinking, what I was feeling, to dig up buried material, to remember things that I've forgotten, to vent, to express my grief, my sadness, my rage, my joy. So I've always used writing as a way to discover what's happening inside of me. It's one of the most effective tools for me in my toolkit. And I've also been a public writer from the time I was a teenager. So I was a radio host, I was a talk show host, I was a news reporter, I've been a columnist, and I've written, all these books, a blogger. I've written all these books that, I just didn't know when I started where it was going to lead. But I really love words as a tool for inspiring other people. And I'm more interested really in community building and healing than specifically writing. Writing is just the tool that I like to help people use.
And you're so good at it too.
Thank you. That's very kind of you.
So why is writing effective for healing, do you think, and community building? What is it about writing?
Well, I think one of the things that's great about writing for survivors is that it's private, it's free, and it's always accessible. So if you wake up at 2 a.m. or you can't sleep and you're feeling anxious or you're struggling, your notebook, your journal can be right there by your bedside, and you can pour your heart out into that notebook. I mean, I really encourage people to share their writing, and we could talk more about that later, but just as a tool for yourself, it's always there. You don't have to pay for it. And there are tools for using writing and ways to make it safe to use. But it's a wonderful way to discover what's happening inside and to ground yourself.
Oh, that is so true. So true. How important was it for you when you were in your healing, when you were healing incest?
Well, I had my first incest memories 35 years ago. I was 27 years old, and it completely, as you know, it completely tore my life upside down, and I was devastated. And I had to not only remember what had happened and realize that all the beliefs I had about myself and my family, not all, but many of them were false. I created a false reality. But I also had to have the feelings, which I had been buried at the time the abuse took place, because I was a great dissociator, and a lot of other tools that I'm sure everyone listening to this is familiar with, all the ways that we disappear, freeze, flee. So when I started healing, I had to feel all of that, and it was devastating. And one of the very first things I did is I joined a writing group run by Sandra Butler, who was the author of Conspiracy of Silence, one of the it even predated The Courage to Heal, a very early book about incest. And I was living in the Bay Area. She was in San Francisco, and she had this writing group for incest survivors, and I joined. And that got just these floodgates opened of writing. And I filled notebook after notebook after notebook after notebook. I mean, dozens of notebooks during those first several years. So it was an incredibly important tool for me. And I discovered so much about myself. I processed my feelings. I, got to know my inner child. I expressed my rage. I had dialogues with myself and with other people that I wasn't ready to speak to. I made decisions about my own healing process. I mean, I just used it in every possible way. It's continued to be a very important part of my life and my self-care. I was writing before that, but writing has just been a very important part of who I am, personally. And then professionally, it's been really important for me to want to use writing as a bridge to other people, whether it's to inspire them, to convert them, I've written a lot of diatribes in my life about things that upset me, politics. And so I've just used writing, for a lot of things, to inform, to inspire, and as a way to offer what I know and what I've learned to others. And it's a very effective way to communicate.
It certainly is. Yeah. And you really believe it's important when you're digging into those memories, when you're going into, you're really wanting to get into deep truth, that you create a safe container.
Yes.
So what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's really important that, and writing is not necessarily the right tool for everyone throughout their healing process. For sometimes if you're in a place where you're already flooded with emotion and memories and you're barely functioning, then trying to use writing as a tool to excavate more is probably not a very good idea. I mean, I did that because I had this idea, if I excavated things faster, I would heal quicker, and I'd be done with it, which, I think we all have that wish when we're deep in a healing process, that how could I speed this up instead of how can I surrender to this process? That ultimately I really want to believe I'm going to get to the other side. So there are times when using writing as a tool to dig more up is not a wise choice. But you could also use writing as a way to ground yourself. And later on, I could maybe give some prompts that could be very helpful, using writing as a way to help us get grounded. But as a tool for exploration, it's powerful. And some of the things that are helpful in terms of safety, one is to create some kind of ritual that works for you when you start writing. So it could be as simple as lighting a candle. I've spent the last 10 years writing this memoir, wholehearted, about my relationship with my mother, which was a very difficult relationship, which was ultimately resolved. But we had a lot of conflict, especially around the sexual abuse, because her father was my perpetrator, and she never believed that it had happened to me. And so I had to deal with that. And the whole time I was working on this book, I created a little altar in the corner of my office, and it was like a little table with a beautiful cloth, and there was this really loving picture of the two of us when she was elderly, and starting to have dementia, and I'm there with my arms around her. And I had that there. And on that altar, I also had written a prayer for my book. which is basically what I hoped it would be and what I wanted to call into the universe to give me the strength, the courage, the insight, the fortitude to complete it. And I would sit down to write, and I would read that prayer out loud, and I would light the candle. And it created this container, like, now's the time you're diving into this material. And then when the time was over, I would blow out the candle, and I would do everything in reverse. It's also helpful especially if you're choosing to write about difficult topics, or, something that may bring a lot of memories or emotions up, that you don't do it sandwiched between two other events. So you don't, go to your kids' school to pick them up, and you have 20 minutes sitting there. It's not a time to pull out your notebook and start writing about incest. So when you do want to do that, it's important to have time and space around it, to have some kind of ritual, to have adequate time, and that after your writing time, that you have time to ground yourself again. I mean, for me, it often is going out and walking and just really focusing my attention on the bottom of my feet and feeling them planted into the ground. And really, I love nature. It's a really powerful force for me. So I have a yard with trees and garden. My spouse is a gardener, and I just go outside, or I go for a walk, and that really helps get me back in my body, and get me grounded again. So it's good to have a beginning and ending time. The way I teach writing often is something called writing practice, which was developed by Natalie Goldberg. And when I teach that, we used a timer. So there's actually a timed exercise. So sometimes if you're digging into something that is going to be difficult, saying, I'm just going to write for 20 minutes, and having a little kitchen timer. And when the kitchen timer goes off, you're going to stop and do something in terms of self-care. And that way you don't feel like, I'm just going to get dissolved into this writing and never be able to recover from it. So actually having a time limit can be useful. Some people write in groups, like a survivors group, which also requires some safety to make it work well. Some people write in their therapist's office, or bring their writing to their therapist because they don't feel safe doing it alone. So I think each person has to determine how to do it. And one other thing is that you want your words to be private. So depending on who you live with and your circumstances, it might be that you could leave your notebook out, or it might be that you want to have a locked drawer or a locked box, or to, put a thing right on the front of I was at a retreat last week, a 5-day silent retreat. And I was writing a lot of pretty intense stuff. And I wrote on the front of the journal, if I die, burn this notebook. And I don't usually do that, but I just thought I didn't want my children to read what I was writing about. I really didn't. And I thought, I'm not going to, and so I did that. And hopefully they'll respect it if the notebook is still around and I die and they clean up my stuff and they find that notebook. And some people will write and email it to someone else, like a therapist or a trusted friend. So I think you have to decide for yourself, especially if someone read your journals or there was some betrayal around your writing, what do you need to feel safe in order to do it? So those are some of the basic guidelines.
I love these guidelines. And I'm remembering, Laura, as you were talking about that safety, what I was doing when I was recovering, from the memory or the realization of incest, and very similar elements, that I had an altar set up and I would write near my altar. And then when I closed the book, I went for a walk, because earth is so naturally grounding and anchoring, and it kind of refreshes the spirit again to come back to it another day. And if there were tears that still needed to be cried, I'd walk and cry and walk and cry until the tears were gone and I could breathe again. Those rituals are rich for helping us move through it, right?
Yeah, I teach a lot of writing retreats, and sometimes there'll be a prompt that I'll give, and I just could feel energetically like everyone in the room is bottomed out. Like it was really intense, what people wrote. And so then I might have planned something else, but I'll just change what I'm doing and I'll do something that is strengthening. I might say the next prompt might be first of all, I might get people up to move. We might dance, put some music on, or do something with movement or meditation. Or the next prompt might be something like, what gives me strength? Or I feel joy when I blank, so that there's, when all else fails. a gift I bring to the world. So, there are things that you could have people write about that really help you focus on your strengths again. And I think it's really important to do that. And I think in the early days of healing from sexual abuse, we didn't focus enough on self-care. There's a lot of like, let's get all these memories out. But really, when I wrote the Courage to Heal workbook, I really stressed that self-care is a really important part of the healing process. And as you're digging and excavating and feeling, you also need to be building your strengths and your resiliency simultaneously. And I certainly didn't understand that when I was in the first 4 or 5 years of my own healing process. Sounds like you didn't either.
Nope. Nope. Had to discover that one later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that what you mean when you say don't let your writing fester in your notebook, or does that mean something different?
No, that means something different. Yeah. There's something, writing is very powerful, just the act of writing. But when you share that writing and when you speak it out loud, it goes to a whole different level. And that's festering in your notebook means you write it and you never share it. And of course, in order to share it, you need a really safe person to share it with. And it could be a therapist, it could be, in a writing workshop that has really guidelines for confidentiality and where, it's really set up to build a container for that writing. It could be a spouse, it could be a best friend, it could be another survivor, but it needs to be someone who will listen without commenting, without trying to fix you, without launching into their story. There are certain guidelines for listening, and but to read what you've said out loud to a willing receiver. And really what we want is we need to be witnessed. And when someone witnesses what you've written, it is so transformative, because it's you could still feel really ashamed when it's in your notebook. But once you've actually spoken the words out loud and someone has looked at you with love and compassion as you've spoken or told the story, and they're not glaring at you, they're not running out of the room, they're still right there, that is the most powerful. That act of love, of deep listening, is incredibly powerful. So that's what I mean, don't let it fester in your notebook. Find that safe place. And, if you're not ready to read it to anyone, read it out loud to yourself. Because even just, a lot of times when we write, there's what Natalie Goldberg calls monkey mind. There's the critic is like, this sucks. I don't know how to do this. I didn't do this right. I'm not really a writer. And all these kind of judgment. I never sound like so-and-so sounds. All that is going on, and we don't really know what it is we've written. But when you actually speak the words out loud, you take them in on a whole different level. So I always read my work out loud. I mean, not just healing work or transformative work or therapeutic work, but actually when I'm writing something for publication, reading it out loud is actually the best way to edit, because I get to hear when things are repetitive. I get to hear the rhythm of the language, which is really important. So I really encourage people to read out loud to themselves or to a safe other person. So that's what that means. Don't let it fester in your notebook.
I love that. And you are so right. That power of being heard is a huge part of the healing, being heard and witnessed and loved, and giving yourself that opportunity through your writing just makes so much sense.
I mean, the other thing that's powerful about a writing group, or like the writing circle I was in with Sandra Butler, or the writing groups that I lead, is that when everyone is responding to the same prompt, and you get to hear, 12 women in a room all respond to the same thing, and there's universal threads in what everyone has said, and there's such differences too, but you feel this incredible love and compassion when someone else reads, and it helps you feel less ashamed yourself. So it's very powerful to be in a safe group where writing can be shared. At the same time, sometimes it could be overwhelming. Sometimes you have to learn how to take care of yourself so you're not walking out of that group carrying everyone else's stories as well as your own. So that's one of the first things I teach people is, how do you walk out if you're only carrying your own stuff?
So beautiful. And I'm also really hearing you say it becomes a way when we hear each other's stories that we also have a way to release the shame that we've been carrying. And that's a huge part of recovery from sexual abuse.
Yes.
Yeah. You also talk about writing for grounding. Now that's a concept I haven't encountered. Mm-hmm. So what is that for you?
It's usually writing about something that's working in my life. So it's like reinforcing, it could be writing about an animal. It could be writing about my grandchildren. It could be writing about my favorite walk. It could be, I'm a swimmer. It could be writing about being in the pool. I mean, or writing about some part of my life that feels like it's functional and where I'm showing strength. And I write about that strength with pride. And that really does help ground me.
Yeah.
So that's one way, or just like remembering a time I knew I would survive. Like that's a great prompt, so that you go back or think about, I might have people write, tell me about a time that you demonstrated great courage. And then they write the story of, something they did where they showed courage. And it helps remind us that that part of us does exist, even if in the moment we're not connected with that part. So it's important to write those kind of things as well. Or, as I said, I'm a big dissociator. And, so I'll probably work on that till the day I die. But so for me, one prompt I've used a lot is I feel connected when, and I just reinforce what helps me feel connected and present and not to, fly away. Those are
some awesome prompts. Oh my gosh, that's why I've been enjoying getting your email. It's like, yes. Wow. And it's such a beautiful way to invite an individual to explore themselves in a way they may not have explored themselves in their journey. Is that what's happening?
It is. One other really powerful thing, I don't think, I would do this with someone who was just beginning, but if you really develop a writing practice, would be to go back and take an experience that was difficult or traumatic and to tell that story. And so that you really get to express what it was, but then you rewrite it with a different ending. And often I'll have people bring in, there's a woman named Dina Metzger who's written a beautiful book about writing called Writing for Your Life. And she calls it creating a usable history. So, a lot of us don't really have a positive history to draw on. And so, I did this, I remember I did this practice for about a year, one time where I wrote through my entire childhood and I invented basically an ally who was like my guardian angel, so that I rewrote some critical moments as if this other person, an ally, had been there encouraging me. And I rewrote these stories about my life. And I think it changed some of the synapses in my brain, even though it was fiction, I was making these things up, but they were very, very powerful. So, or it could be, a time you were not able to speak, or you're not able to say no, or you were not able to do something that, maybe you're still blaming yourself for, even though you were 3 or 5 or 13 years old. And then you could go back and what if I had it to do over again, and to rewrite that scene with the strength of who you are coming through now. That's a really powerful healing tool.
I can also tell you it's powerful to listen to. I'm sure you know this as well. But when I went to visit your website to see what you were up to these days, and one of the videos I listened to was you sharing one of those stories where you had rewritten your history. And I literally had tears coming down my face because it was, yes. I mean, I do that through journey work with people, right? We go in and recreate what they experienced. And I knew as a writer how powerful that is to recreate it with all the words and the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings that you wanted to receive. And you're really reforming yourself. And it was magnificent to hear you read that story. Deeply touching.
Thank you.
Deeply transformative. Yeah, I love that. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because I really wanted our viewers today to hear about that. How wonderful it can be in the healing process. So we've been talking about writing as healing, a healing tool. It changes when you write something for publishing, for others to read.
Yes, it does.
The whole world changes, doesn't it? So
It does.
I remember my trepidation when I wrote my first book. And I would love to hear about your thoughts about writing for others, writing for the world.
Yeah, it's something I feel like is my life work. I mean, it's clearly what I'm meant to do. It's not just writing, it's I'm a communicator. So, it could be I'm teaching a workshop, or I'm writing, or I'm on the radio, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. I mean, there's a lot of ways to communicate. And that when I'm communicating, I feel like I'm completely in the flow of taking who I am as a human being and putting it out in the world in the way I'm meant to. So I think I was very driven to do it. With The Courage to Heal, which was my first book, that I was working on that book. It got published when I was 31 years old. So I started writing it. I was 28. I was such a baby. I have a son who's turning 28, so I know how young he is, and I was very young, and I was in the throes of my own incest work. I teamed up with Ellen Bass, who was my co-author for the book. And she's not an incest survivor, but I am. And I all the interviews I did probably a couple hundred in-depth interviews for that book. And every time I went to do an interview, I was not an objective reporter. I was going in, and whatever I was struggling with, if I was struggling with sex, then I would interview that woman about her sex life. If I was not speaking to my mother, we would talk about family relationships. And so I cried through so many of those interviews. It was really very cathartic for me. And I found that for me, writing it was very empowering and also very terrifying. And I was convinced that the book would never be published. We had a contract, we had signed a contract. I mean, it was going to happen, but I really didn't believe it, because I thought what we were writing was too radical. And it was very, very radical for the time. It was groundbreaking. No one was saying the things that we were saying at that time. And there's a lot of anger in the book too. I mean, there's a lot of compassion, but I mean, we didn't pull any punches. And so I was convinced that would happen. I was terrified about how my family would react. And I mean, I was disowned by pretty much everyone on my mother's side of the family. Now, 30 something years later, a lot of those relationships have mended to some degree. So it was, and then when The Courage to Heal came out, within about 6 months, it was just like one of these word of mouth things, like passed from hand to hand to hand. Therapists started giving it to their clients, and we suddenly were the apex of a movement. And from The Courage to Heal, I mean, there were a lot of other things happening at the same time, but The Courage to Heal was the most visible kind of talisman of the survivors healing movement. And I suddenly was thrust into the spotlight. I was speaking all over the country. I was teaching workshops, but mostly I was speaking and being interviewed everywhere. And I was still very much in my own healing process. I mean, you're in your healing process for your whole life, but I mean, I was in the very intense phase of healing from sexual abuse. So it was really mixed for me. I felt like I was doing what I was supposed to do. I felt impassioned. I had tons of energy for it. And I felt like when I would give those speeches, it was like, I don't use this word easily or lightly, but I really felt like there was some incredible force just coming right through me. And afterwards, I would often feel devastated. Like I would feel so used up, because I didn't really have the emotional, psychic skills yet to handle that kind of energy. And also, everywhere I went, I was hearing everyone's incest story. And thousands and thousands of them. And, The Courage to Heal reached a couple of million people. So we would get bagloads of mail. It was very intense. It was wonderful. And it also was overwhelming. So I did that for about 5 years. And then there was a huge backlash against the movement of survivors speaking out. And we were one of the targets of that backlash. So, it was a very kind of incredible roller coaster experience for me. And yet I feel very proud of that book. I feel like Ellen and I were meant to come together to write it. And I'm not someone who is very woo-woo in the way I speak about things, really, but I felt like it was meant to happen, and that I was in the right place at the right time to deliver that message. And I feel really good about it. I think the thing that's the saddest to me is that The Courage to Heal is still selling. And 35 years later, 32 years later, that it's still needed. Like I think back then we had this idea that we were going to change everything, and that there wasn't going to be sexual abuse anymore. And to know that there's generation after generation since that book came out needing it, it makes me sad. But I'm glad
It
it's
is
there as a
sad.
resource. I'm glad it's there.
Yeah, indeed. I'm really hearing that in your courage to heal, you took a lot of us along for the ride and you
Yeah.
opened up that opportunity. And as difficult as that was for you on behalf of a couple million women, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Wow. What a
Yeah,
commitment.
it's very it is me. Yes, I did that, but I really, I don't know. I feel like I was well used or well utilized, and that um, I am that person, or one of the people who wrote that book, but I'm just a survivor. I'm just a human being like everybody else, and I've continued to heal in lots of different ways. Um, I it's not at all like it was then. I don't really think about incest anymore. It's just not in my daily life. It's not in my, I'm sure there's still some ways that it casts a shadow on my life. And at this point, so far down the line, I would say it has brought me both some very painful places and given me some liabilities that I carry in my life, but it's also brought me incredible strength. And it's just a fact. It's just a fact, like, that I had a twin who died. It's a fact, like, my mother and I had a really difficult relationship. It's, I was born into a certain type of family. I was raised in the 60s and influenced by hippie. My dad became a hippie. I mean, there's lots of things that shape me. And sexual abuse is one, but it's not the highlight or the low light. I mean, it's not the focal point. And I think I really want people to know that.
I'm really glad. Go ahead.
You won't be in so much pain later.
That's right. I think it's so helpful when somebody's at the beginning of the journey to know that there really is a rainbow out there. You really do experience a life again that is filled with happiness and joy. Or if you never experience that, you can. It can be fulfilling and meaningful. And that's what I'm really hearing you say is there is a point where the incest or the rape or whatever you experienced really is behind you. And you're living more as the woman you always came here to be and wanted to be.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. I have to ask you, Laura, what are your thoughts about the Me Too movement and what's happening now? I mean, you came in at a pivotal time for women in acknowledging that this was really going on, because we were in denial. We weren't really acknowledging it as a society. And to some extent, we stayed lulled asleep. And Me Too has really shaken things up. What do you think
Me Too is
about
really important. I think that every movement that brings people to more freedom and that confronts violence, sexual violence, or confronts racism or homophobia or sexism, that we stand on the shoulders of those who have come before. So, The Courage to Heal was a pivotal book, and I feel really proud of being part of that kind of surge of movement to survivors reclaiming their lives and not just being like, this happened and now your life is ruined. But we stood on the shoulders of the movements for justice that had come before and the people who had been activists before. And so, to me, the Me Too movement is just like one more link in this golden chain of people standing up and, speaking out against the status quo of, abuse, violence, materialism, sexism, homophobia. So yeah, that's how I see it. I feel like it's connected, and I always love when there's a new generation of activists, because some of us, as we get older, are not as motivated as we were when we were young to act in the same ways. We act in different ways. So I'm always happy to see what the next generation is doing. And
That's awesome.
I love reading about Me Too.
Yeah, I do too. It's coming further out of the closet, and a little more accountability is occurring. And most of all, I think from my perspective, it is opening a doorway for us to take our healing even deeper, and our consciousness even further. And that's a blessing for everyone. ultimately.
I just think that big changes in society, they don't happen without a huge fight. No one willingly gives up power. Whether it's a sadistic abuser, a politician, the head of a corporation, uh, people don't this people who have the status quo, that people don't give up power um, readily or on their own. They have to be forced to, and it usually is because there's an incredible upwelling that finally explodes out and forces change, and then that change becomes self-evident. People they can't really relate to, I I can't remember when. It's always been like this, hasn't it?
That's
um,
right. That's right.
gay marriage was like that. It was just like, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, and yet now it's the law of the land. It happened. And the other thing is that every time there's progress, there's a backlash. And that is the way that change gets made. And it's going to keep being that way, so we have to just keep pushing. We have
That's
to
right.
keep moving forward.
And calling ourselves to higher and higher standards, which is what I'm also hearing you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have to heal ourselves first. And I think that's another thing, is that to be really effective in the world, you have to do your own work first. You can't just go out there and try to change the world. And I think one of the experiences I had in those early years of the Courage to Heal was that there was such a split between my external persona and who I was able to be out in the world and what I was feeling on the inside. And my work in the 3 decades since then has been to heal that split, so that there's much more integration. And it's taken a lot of work, through a lot of different means. But I think that's what we're trying to do. So it's how do we bring the inner experience and the outer persona in alignment, so that we're on the outside, we're the same as the people we are on the inside.
Yes. Yes. And that commitment to one's journey, I think that's such a beautiful thing that we do for the planet when we're healing internally. Mm. We're contributing, the way I like to think of it, is this field of consciousness. We're shifting it.
Yeah, we are.
And we're learning how to love each other better and be accepting of each other's differences and not need to act out in violence, but maybe to find better ways to connect with each other and understand each other. It's a huge gift to just choose to be in alignment, full alignment with yourself, and just to live a more conscious life.
Yeah, it's definitely the work of a lifetime.
It is.
So it's like, I guess I want to say that the healing process continues, but it doesn't have that like burning, despairing intensity. And, I think I really felt when I was in the beginning of healing that it was like, it was never going to end. That I had to go through it this time with feelings. And I felt like it was a horrible trick being played on me. And I've continued to heal. I'm someone who likes to grow. I mean, that's my MO in life, is I'm someone who likes to grow in every area of my life, as much as I can. And so that's my orientation. But it's not that there aren't times it's not difficult, or I'm not at my edge and it's uncomfortable, but it's not uncomfortable in the way it was 35 years ago when I was not functional. So I want people to know that you could keep growing, but it's not going to always be as intense as it is right now, and that it's worth it.
It is worth it. And what a beautiful and important message. That is exactly true. It changes, and it isn't quite as painful as it is in the beginning. Thank goodness. We learn a lot in those early years, don't we? Yes. We learn a lot, and we discover that we are stronger than we think we are. Much stronger than we think we are, and that we get to live good lives and full lives. And you have. Go ahead.
I have. Well, just about we're stronger than we think we are, but we're also more vulnerable than we think we are, because some of us, I'm one of them, had a false strength, that I led with, and so my journey has been much more to find my vulnerability, and to find it's much more of a true strength. than the kind of false strength that I relied on for so long. I don't think it really fooled anybody, but I thought I was fooling everyone.
It's a great mask, isn't it? But when it comes off, it's so much better.
Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Laura, you've created a special gift for our viewers today. Would you like to talk about that a little bit? What are you sharing?
Yes. I've recorded a guided visualization that leads to a writing prompt. It's something I have used in, I teach a workshop on writing through grief and loss, and this is one of the exercises from that retreat. And so if people want to come to my website, it's lauradavis.net/gift, and you can download this audio, and you can have a little notebook, and I'll take you through a meditation that will be one of the things that will help build your strengths.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
A lovely gift. Awesome. Well, Laura, I have so enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, I've enjoyed talking to you too.
I'm so glad. And the gift of those beautiful prompts and your encouragement in our writing and how we can use writing for our healing is such a tremendous gift for the planet right now. So thank you for being you, for the amazing woman you are. And
thank you for putting this together.
My joy, truly my joy to know that there are women getting some help and support that they need in their journey. All right. So love to you and love to all of our viewers. I want to thank you all for being here with us and being on the journey. And I look forward to seeing you in the next interview.